Hey everyone! Thanks for joining me here on Deja Food and welcome back to my kitchen. If this is your first time on my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos, tips, tricks, or recipes. In my family, we are sandwich people. Sandwiches are my 11-year-old's favorite food, which is awesome. So easy for me. And we go through a lot of bread. We have recently switched to home making our bread. Now I know that sounds super intimidating for a lot of people. It sounds intimidating, but it's not, because I have a little trick up my sleeve. I've got a bread maker. I have fallen in love with that thing for making bread, dough. I've been on a cinnamon roll kick lately, which we'll do another video for later, so make sure you tune in for that one. But it is time to make another loaf. I have worked through some of the kinks and problems that we have had as we have perfected this recipe, and I think I found just the right recipe for a perfect white bread. Let's go ahead and get started. You ready? Let's go. All right, we are ready to go. So right now I have my little, I don't even know what you call this, the little tin, I guess, from my bread maker. It's a lot easier to add things in when it is out of the bread maker, just because if you end up spilling any flour or anything inside the actual machine, that's an oven, so it will end up with this horrible burning smell, which we don't want. So the first step is going to be to make sure that this oh so lovely little paddle is seated in there the way that it is supposed to be. Now, I make a point to say this because one time I had gotten through, this whole thing takes about 5 hours in the bread maker to do. I had gotten through about 4.5 of those, wondered why I wasn't smelling my bread, and then found this darn paddle in my drying rack. So all that was spinning was this tiny little post that obviously does not mix anything at all. So now I am traumatized enough to be extra careful about that darn paddle. So learn from my mistakes. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add 2¼ cups of flour. Now in my kitchen, I already just have all-purpose flour. I'm not one of those people that buys a bunch of different fancy flours, and chances are you aren't either. That's definitely a little bit past my storage capacity to handle. So I just have all-purpose flour. So this is my 1 cup measuring cup. I know it looks super fancy. There we go. I know it looks super fancy. Super cute. My stepmom got it for me. She's amazing. But we're gonna go ahead and put our 2½ cups of flour into our tin. Now I've used this thing enough that I can eyeball it. This is a 1/2 cup. So if you do not have a little vessel that you have been using for the better part of a decade, make sure that you measure. I just do it because I'm cheating. So the other little thing to notice, get this out of the way here, is because this is all-purpose flour and not bread flour, the chemical makeup is a little bit different. And this is where I had to tweak my recipe a little bit, because the first time that our loaf of bread came out, it was really kind of dry and crumbly. I could not figure out why it wasn't holding together. It wouldn't slice very well. You couldn't make sandwiches out of it because it just wouldn't hold together. So I did a little bit of research, and this is where my work is going to be your benefit, because I learned that not all flours are created equal when it comes to gluten. Obviously, that's kind of a buzzword these days. Everybody's going gluten-free, or people who have a legitimate medical need to be gluten-free. This recipe is not for you. We have to add some in. So all-purpose flour has less gluten in it than bread flour. The gluten is really important because that's what creates those sticky little strings that actually binds your bread together. So if you don't have enough gluten in your recipe, your bread will be really crumbly and it'll fall apart. So after trial and error, I found that with my recipe, I need to add an additional tablespoon of gluten. Now, I am not sure where the best place in your area to get gluten is, but I get it in the bulk bins at Winco. It is labeled Vital Wheat Gluten. I'm not sure if it would be the same everywhere, but that's what you look for. It's in the little bulk bins that's by the baking section. So if not, I'm sure you can look it up online. There'd be a million different options for where to buy it. So we now have made up for the fact that we don't have bread flour. We are using all-purpose flour, so we added that gluten in. The next thing that we are going to do is we're going to add some dry milk. This, again, I live in bulk. It is a great way to stretch your budget. And you can also just get as much as you need, so you don't have to overload your pantry with all the craziness. So for our dry milk, we're just gonna do 1 tablespoon of that as well. Put it on in there. When I had my kids help me make this the first time, they were horrified that this was milk. They could not figure it out. One of them took a nice big sniff. If you've ever smelled dry milk, it has a particular smell, and for a child, it was not that pleasant. So that was a little entertaining. Okay, so next we are going to add in salt. Now, the salt is our flavoring. I have mentioned in previous videos that I am not a huge fan of overly salting things. Too much salt in your diet is really not good for you. It can harden up some of your arteries, causes a lot of water retention. It's just not very good for you. However, the proper amounts, especially in baking, because baking is chemistry, salt is helpful. It adds some flavor. We're doing 1 teaspoon of it. Feels like a lot, but it's not. Trust me. If you don't add salt in here, first of all, there's less to keep your yeast in check, but also your bread will taste like nothing. It's awful. So trust me, some things need some salt. So we have our 1 teaspoon added in there. Then we're going to add in 2 tablespoons of butter. I grab my butter knife here. I have my little butter dish that I always keep next to the toaster with room temperature butter because it's easier to spread. But I just put 1 stick of butter in there. And because I have been baking so much, I can just eyeball how much 2 tablespoons is. If you can't, in the stick here, you can see that it has the measurements for the tablespoons. So until you get the experience to really be able to just use your mental image of this grid, you can go ahead and just cut it off in there and then open it up. But for me, that's it. Let's see how I did. Hey, not too shabby. All right. So we are going to take the side that does not have all the crumbs on it from the kids. And we're going to put that in there. Now you do need a decent amount of fat. The real fat of the butter is a lot better than margarine. Margarine has a lot of chemicals in it. It also just molecularly, it just isn't the same. You want the real butter. The less chemicals you can put in your body, the better. So we have our flour, gluten, our dried milk, salt, butter. The next thing we need to add is a little bit of sugar. Now, I have pre-measured out my kids and I, we are homeschooling with COVID, and we did a science experiment today where we're making, as I'm spilling it everywhere, where we are making rock candy because we're on crystallization in science. So we used all of our sugar, but I saved out just enough for our bread. Now this is 2 tablespoons, and it did get a little bit stuck in there because all the moisture that's been in my kitchen with boiling all that water. So the sugar is in there. It's not enough to make the bread actually sweet, but the sugar in there feeds the yeast. So that's what's gonna help your bread to rise. So we have our sugar. The next thing that we're gonna do is get our water. Okay, now I have this super awesome, handy dandy little measuring cup. If you can see, it has these little lines on the side, so I can just look over the top and see what my measurement is. For this particular recipe, we need 7 ounces. So this one is really handy. A lot of times before this recipe, I really honestly felt like the ounces side of measuring cups were useless. I need it now. Every cup is 8 ounces and you need 7 of them. So thankfully, my little ounces side, it would be really hard to estimate 7/8 of a cup, but I have a little line over here for my 7 ounces. So we're just gonna pour that on top. Now we're doing it in this order because you want all of your dry ingredients on the bottom and your liquid put in last. That is so you don't end up with a gummy, nasty thing on the bottom. You wanna make sure that you have, as your paddle is stirring, it's incorporating that water slowly, and that will keep it from getting a gloopy mess on the bottom. So now we are going to put it in our bread machine. All right, my loves, so now we have our little tin seated into our bread machine. We're gonna close the lid. Now this recipe works for machines that have this yeast feeder. Mine is really old. It's obviously very well loved, but I'm not sure if you could just put the yeast right in for a machine that doesn't have this feeder. So at this point, just consider this recipe just for machines that have an automatic feeder. So our last step is to go ahead and add our yeast, which I just have this oh so beautiful jar of active dry yeast. And all we're gonna need for this one, pardon my wobbliness, it's almost dinner time and my hypoglycemia is kicking in. We're just gonna put in 1 teaspoon. And we're gonna close that lid. With my particular loaf, we do light. Push start, and that's all there is to it. Bread machine does the rest. Obviously, it will take 4 hours. And so in another 4 hours, I'll check back in with you. Let's see how it turns out. Okay, everyone, we now have fresh baked bread. I really wish that there was such a thing as smell-o-vision because my house smells amazing. So we have our nice hot bread. It is hot. It just came out of the oven part of the bread machine process. And all we're gonna do to get it out of here is turn it upside down, give it a decent shake, and there it is. This is gonna be super hot. It's nice and fresh here. This is gonna be super hot for a while, so we're just gonna let it sit before we cut into it. But there you have it, perfect loaf. I don't know if you can see this. Nice and squishy, good thump on the outside, good texture, and a nice crust. We're ready to go. Hope you guys have enjoyed this session of Deja Food. Hopefully your house smells as delicious as mine with your brand new fresh baked bread. See you next time.